From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Here's what's coming up. K-State's Nathan Hendricks and Gabe Sampson will report on their new analysis of the value of groundwater in the High Plains Aquifer Region. They used land sales data and cropland rental rate trends to determine the economic importance of those groundwater resources to Kansas agriculture. Very interesting work. You'll hear about it next. Then from the Washburn University School of Law, Roger McEowen goes over the elements of a land use agreement between a landowner and a hunter, and why he says that forging a formal and a detailed agreement in writing is beneficial to both parties. And K-State's Gus van Der Hoeven is ahead with this week's Stop, Look, and Listen. All that here on Agriculture Today. Glad to have you tuned in once again for another Agriculture Today. Well, we discussed at length in casual conversation how important groundwater is to Kansas agriculture. And you think of the western part of the state in specific in support of crop production and other enterprises for sure. But is there an actual value attached to that groundwater, and how could that be identified? That was taken on by our guests now recently in a new analysis. They're from the Agricultural Economics Department here at K-State, Nathan Hendricks and Gabe Sampson. Putting a value here on groundwater, Nathan, we'll start with you. It's a formidable task trying to assign such a value, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a challenge because a lot of commodities, we have a price for that commodity. So if you want to know the value of corn, the value of wheat, those are traded, and we have a price that we can assess the value of those commodities. Water is not really traded per se because it's obviously very difficult to make trades, and so there's not a well-functioning market for water in western Kansas. So it makes it a more difficult challenge, certainly, to place a value. But what we do is we look at that value of water should get captured to some extent in the land that is using that water. So we're looking at the value of land to be able to assess something about what the value of that water is.
And there is a reason to want to investigate this in the first place, you think, as far as establishing that value?
Yeah, I think it's important as we start to assess different measures that we might take to conserve the aquifer is that it's important to say, okay, what would be the value of that? And so, we're not weighing the costs of different policies, but at least to say, all right, if we were to preserve the aquifer for longer, what kind of economic value might that have?
Well, let's bring Gabe in here and take on one of the approaches that you did employ here in trying to establish that value. You looked at, Gabe, you say, land transaction data over time, irrigated versus non-irrigated, as a way to gauge this.
Yeah, so there's not really an eBay where you can buy and sell an acre-foot of water for agricultural irrigation. So as an alternative to estimating a value of water, what we look at is a relative difference in value in land transactions for irrigated and non-irrigated land. And so any premium that irrigated land has over otherwise similar non-irrigated land provides evidence to the value that buyers and sellers put on irrigated production.
So you went about that analysis. What did you find in a very general sense here?
So roughly speaking, we estimate that on average, irrigated land sells for about 50% more than non-irrigated land. So if we extrapolate that out to the roughly 2.5 million irrigated acres in Kansas, we estimate that land values in Kansas are about $3.8 billion greater today than they otherwise would be without access to the High Plains Aquifer in western Kansas.
That's a big number, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a large, substantial number, and just provides evidence of how valuable irrigation is in western Kansas.
As part of this exercise, though, you also took it further and looked at what happens when there's a change in the level of the Ogallala, and that's expressed in the term saturated thickness. Irrigators will be familiar with that. What did you look at there specifically, and what did you find?
Yeah, so, one concern with the aquifer is depletion over time. And the best way to look at the valuation that depletion has is to look at small changes in water stocks over time. And so what we look at is what's called saturated thickness, which is a common measure of groundwater stock. And we look at differences in irrigated land values between parcels that differ only in the groundwater stock under the parcel. And what we estimate is that a 1 foot change in the groundwater stock under the parcel is associated with between a $3 and $15 per acre change in the value of irrigated land. Again,
that's impactful then, that change.
That is, again, if you extrapolate this out to the 2.5 million irrigated acres in Kansas, a uniform 1 foot increase in saturated thickness of the aquifer would have a market valuation, we estimate, of between about $8 million and $41 million.
Wow. There was another angle to this. Nathan, we'll bring you back in to talk a bit. You also picked up on rental rates as an indicator of irrigation water value here.
Yeah, so another approach that we took was to look at county-level rental rate data from USDA, and you can look at how irrigated rental rates differ across the aquifer. And this is looking beyond Kansas and looking across the whole High Plains Aquifer and looking at areas where they have less water just because there was less water to start with compared to areas that had a larger stock of groundwater to start with, and look at how rental rates differ and also how irrigated acres differ. So as the aquifer declines, one of the things we expect is that people are going to adjust to that. One way is they just simply stop irrigating some parcels, or they consolidate irrigation. They reduce how many acres and concentrate that water on a smaller area. And then we can also see that they might decrease how much water is applied on the irrigation. That might affect crop yields and so forth. That ends up getting reflected into rental rates. So once we combine irrigated acres and rental rate, you can capture something of like an annual value of that aquifer.
And you did capture such a number then?
Yeah, so we do find, especially when the aquifer, the saturated thickness becomes sufficiently small, somewhere around 70 feet, less than that, then there becomes some pretty significant drops in where more reductions in groundwater stock cause decreases in irrigated acres and also some effects on rental rates.
Well, you take this further then, Nathan, and you looked at what you described a business as usual scenario in terms of irrigation water usage and looked over the next 30-year horizon as to the long-term impact here. Also an interesting set of numbers there. What did you find?
Yeah, so hydrologists have created these projections of what saturated thickness is likely to do going out to 2050, assuming no other measures are taken and we continue on the path that we're on. And under that simulation, we expect that in Kansas, the returns to land are expected to decrease by $34.1 million annually in 2050 compared to what those are today, just because we're going to have less saturated thickness in 2050.
That is a rather sharp declaration, isn't it, as far as the true effect on agriculture?
Yeah, it is a substantial impact. And it obviously differs across Kansas and those places that are already significantly depleted. That's where they're going to feel the hardest impacts of continuing depletion.
Before we pass it up, we do want to note that you actually did take it further and looked at the spillover effects on the broad agriculture and rural economy in the High Plains Aquifer area. And again, those numbers jump off the page, Nathan.
Yeah, so one of the things that people will talk a lot about is it's not only the additional corn production and additional value of cropland, but there's also some spillovers of that. Perhaps we have more livestock production, and obviously if we're producing higher yielding crops, that means that requires more inputs, more fertilizer and all those things, and that has spillovers into agribusiness sectors that are selling those inputs. And so we look at comparing those livestock numbers inside the aquifer compared to counties that are just outside the aquifer. We do this at a county level because we can measure this with Census of Ag, but the basic idea is to say, all right, if there's similar counties in general characteristics, but some are over the aquifer. How much more livestock production and agribusiness sales do we see than those that don't have access to the aquifer?
And numbers that you come up with there, notable.
Yeah, and this is a number of whether we had irrigation or not, so a pretty drastic scenario. But in that scenario, having access to the aquifer increases animal sales by $2.4 billion annually in Kansas, increases the number of cattle on feed by 2.4 million head. And there's also substantial increases in fertilizer and chemical expenditures and overall farm operating expenditures.
Right. Quite a few numbers here that have a big story to tell. When folks take a look at this data, Gabe, what do you hope they take away from it then?
A big takeaway, again, is, number one, placing a valuation on agricultural water is difficult. We're really thankful that we have access to this land sales data so we can get a meaningful estimate of the value of water. From a policy perspective, it's useful to understand the value of water because then we could balance that against investments made for water conservation strategies. And again, recognizing these numbers provides evidence that it's important to, recognize the value of irrigation accessibility in Kansas.
Yeah. There's a great summary of this work on the agmanager.info website. It's entitled The Value of Groundwater in the High Plains Aquifer of Western Kansas. It's an extremely good read on a highly important topic for Kansas agriculture. Gentlemen, thank you for going to the lengths of pulling this all together and for telling us about it today. We appreciate your time.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Eric.
Nathan Hendricks and Gabe Sampson, agricultural economists here at K-State and the co-authors of this new analysis on the value of groundwater in western Kansas. Check it out, agmanager.info. We'll be back on Agriculture Today. Welcome back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today and our regular get-together with Professor of Agricultural Law and Taxation, Washburn University School of Law, Roger McEowen. The thing we'll take up this week, Roger, very commonplace in Kansas, relationships between landowners and hunters. That interaction happens really all the time. You would like to see that process more formalized, and we'll get into what you describe as the elements of a hunting use agreement here today. This is something you'd like all parties to take a hard look at, though.
Well, certainly, Eric, as the arrangements get more complex, and if you've got a farming or ranching operation that gets deeper into hunting and allowing hunting on their properties, maybe as a side business or just as a venture to provide additional income for the farming operation, then I do think it's better to formalize that into some type of written agreement and lay out what the expectations are. Now, in many situations, obviously, it's all done just by granting oral permission, and that may not be much of obviously, it's not a formal type of an arrangement, but it may be really kind of just a small deal. Somebody wants to come hunt on your property on an occasion, and you just grant permission for that, and that's fine. Usually that's okay. But if you get more involved in these things, I think you do need to definitely think about formalizing the agreement. There are a lot of legal issues that can come up. Unfortunately, we deal with this in all areas of life, and this is just another one of those. And so that's why I wrote this recent article for farmers and ranchers that are looking at this as a side business, as revenue generation. As you get more formalized and more involved in this, then you do need to get these agreements in writing.
And by the way, as Roger alludes, this is part of his blog series on the website we'll remind you of in just a second. Before we walk through some of the ingredients of that use agreement, there is a property law concept of a license, and that's in play here, you say.
Yeah, and I titled the article "Elements of a Hunting Use Agreement." I specifically didn't use the word lease agreement because I want to make sure we're clear on what the property interest is that's involved, and that is a license. It's not a lease; it's a license, and that's a term in the law that covers a wide range of permissible land uses. And unless you're permitted by having a license granted to you by the landowner, you would be classified as a trespasser. So if you're a hunter on somebody else's premises with permission, you are a licensee, And that license can be terminated at any time by the landowner, the party that created the license, by simply denying permission to hunt. So it's only a privilege. It's not an interest in the land itself, as would be a tenant who is on the premises farming the property. You have possession of the property. That's an interest in real estate. Well, a license is not an interest in any of the land itself. And it's just a permissive type of use for the purpose granted by the license.
That said, crafting a hunting use agreement, what should be included here? And we'll walk through some possibilities. One thing that you think should be right there up front is the legal description of the property, and in fact, so far as to put out a map of that?
Yeah, certainly if the tract is large enough and there are certain areas that you want people to hunt on, and maybe more importantly, there are certain areas that you do not want people to hunt on, maybe because you have livestock in that particular area or it's a sensitive area for whatever reason, then lay that out in the agreement. Include a description of the property that the hunting operator, is what I would call the hunter, may hunt on, and provide the number of acres, generally describe the property, and then also give a precise legal description and attach all of that as an exhibit to the agreement. And I think it's a good idea also to provide a map that shows areas where hunting is not allowed, as I said, and attach that map so it's clear to those parties that have the license to hunt where they can be and where they should not be.
Starting with that and then getting into whatever allowances the landowner wants to provide the hunter rights, if you will, in this agreement here. And that could go quite far afield, couldn't it?
Yeah, it sure could. For example, list the species that can be hunted, if there are any bag limits, how thorough the hunting can be, if there are sex limitations with respect to the game that's being hunted, size, if you've got antler horn limitations, if it's deer or maybe even elk, depending on where you're at in the state. List those whenever they're appropriate, and then specify what the hunter's right to use the property is for in terms of whether it's an exclusive right or a non-exclusive right. And so what I mean by that is if you're granting the hunter an exclusive hunting right, then the landowner cannot use the property for game hunting purposes during the term of the agreement. If it's a non-exclusive right, then the landowner can also hunt the property for game hunting purposes during the time period that the hunting use agreement is in place. So you need to be clear on that. And that's something, Eric, that we see get questions on this and have for many years with respect to farm leases. Can the farmer hunt their own ground if the ground is leased out? Well, no, not unless you reserve that right in a written lease, because you've given possession of a farm lease. You've given possession over to the farmer, and you don't have the right to hunt your own ground. Now, in practical aspects, in that situation, if the tenant denies the landowner the right to hunt their own property, they're probably going to be a short-term tenant.
Right.
But it's kind of the same principle here. You want to be clear whether you are retaining the right to hunt the property while you have somebody else that is hunting the property pursuant to this agreement, or do you not have that right? So I would put that in there and make sure that's pretty clear.
Something else that you suggest in the article should be spelled out well is the rights of the landowner to conduct normal business on that property, whether it's for grazing, whether it's for farming, whatever it might be.
Yeah, you want to be clear as to what you can do while someone else is hunting on the property, or what about your farming activities? What would be your normal activities during the particular hunting season? Are you retaining those rights? Just make sure the party that is hunting or the parties that are hunting the property are clear on what your retained rights are and what you're going to be doing. You don't want to have misconceptions or misunderstandings based on that. So that's a very important aspect of the agreement.
Likely you get this question, what's a good rate to charge for the granting of hunting rights? Any keys to that in particular? Basically whatever the other party is willing to pay is what this comes down to. It's really hard to figure out what a fair rate to charge for the granting of hunting rights is. And it's basically going to be based on what the market will bear. Are there similar properties with similar game in the area? What are those landowners charging? This can be really difficult to determine. There might be data that's available. I don't know whether K-State Extension keeps that type of data. I don't know whether there's survey data. And in fact, I didn't check before I wrote the article. There might be. I frankly have never heard of it, but talking with neighbors, doing basically
your own economics on this for the use restrictions that I'm giving up for the period of time involved in the agreement. What's that worth to me? What might I lose in terms of crop production, hay production, use of my property for whatever purpose? You want to make sure you recover that and then plus get a premium on top of that. And whatever that is, I don't know. That's going to vary from tract to tract.
We won't be able to get through the whole list of elements, but want to touch upon two more. Does the landowner retain the right to prohibit certain actions and activities on the part of the hunter while in the process of hunting?
Well, they do if they state it in the written agreement. And I think it's pretty clear to state what uses on the property are not allowed in terms of, are campfires allowed? What about the use of dogs? Can the hunters be on the property overnight? You have to be very clear in terms of what uses on the property are allowed and those that are not allowed. And I would include in there driving of vehicles. You may not want vehicles on certain parts of your property. Soil compaction is an issue, creation of ruts in tillable fields, those types of things. So you got to think that through in terms of the uses that you don't want on the property and clearly specify those in the agreement.
And how about liabilities on the part of the landowner? Or the hunter, for that matter, and, well, tied into that, insurance coverage to protect against said liabilities.
Yeah, I would start with insurance coverage and take a look at what you have for your premises. Many farms and ranches have what's called a comprehensive liability policy, but that generally has an exclusionary clause for non-farm business activities of the insured. And this would be one of those non-farm business activities or non-branch business. And so there's probably a clause, an exclusionary clause in the policy that eliminates coverage for this. So you would probably need a rider to have coverage for these type of fee-based activities. Mm-hmm. Now, with that said, on the liability front, many states, including Kansas, have a couple of statutory protections that can come into play. There is an agritourism statute, and there's also a recreational use statute. And so in Kansas, as well as many other states, the landowner is going to want to check to see how those statutes might work with respect to hunting activity on their premises. The basic gist of those statutes is that it provides liability protection to the landowner unless the landowner acts in a way that is willful or, as the law says, wanton in terms of neglect and causing injury to entrance on the property.
Well, we direct folks to that article on the website, Elements of a Hunting Use Agreement, in Roger's blog series. That's at washburnlaw.edu/WALTR. Always appreciate your input. We'll talk again in a couple of weeks. Thanks, Roger.
Thank you, Eric.
Roger McEowen with us. He's a professor of agricultural law and taxation at the Washburn University School of Law. We'll be back with more on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen.
It is a long time ago, but we remember.
That's Gus van Der Hoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
Our youngest son, Martin, made an interesting observation recently. He said that he realized that this year our birthdays would make me exactly twice as old as he was going to be. I find 45 years a very respectable age. Actually, I can't believe he will be that old, and I admire him where he is at this stage in his life, with his Malek Farm Equestrian Center. I still see the small 4-year-old holding a small dog brush and wanting to help with the grooming of our pony Star. That pony came with us from the East Coast, having been born on the Isle of Chincoteague. Yes, it was a Chincoteague pony. I remember we bought him for his older brother, Guido, who then was much younger and learned to ride and care for the pony. The pony died of old age here in Kansas on the hill. It had a wonderful life, and all the kids enjoyed it. All long ago memories. And that brings me to Martin's observation. He said, "Pops, it must be very interesting to become that old and have so many memories." And he added, "If I've had already many memories, being only half as old, you must have many, many more, getting on in age." The funny part is that Anneke and I had been reflecting on that fact a few days earlier, and now, since he brought it up, even more so. Our memories go way back, and the experience of happenings can be very vivid for both of us. Of course, with the present tension around Ukraine, many of our own war memories as a child come back. I was 13 when the war ended. I remember. So does Anneke, and she is 4 years younger. It's very hard. The liberation for us was 77 years ago. Presently, I'm rereading the book, Hell's Highway, written by George Koskamaki. It describes the battles of the 101st Airborne Division, troop carrier pilots and crew members, glider pilots, as well as many Dutch citizens living along the corridor from Eindhoven to Nijmegen, with the object to reach Arnhem, September 1944. Their task was to save and hold the bridges so that the army could push forward fast to reach Arnhem, where the drama of one bridge too far played out. Remember the radio program on finding the remains of glider pilot Utrecht, buried in the corner of a field and accidentally discovered when the farmer plowed that pasture to prepare the land to grow potatoes. That was many years ago, after the war, and only the metal tag, boots, and a few bones were left. No one of the family ever knew what had happened to him until the lonely grave was found many years later. Family came over, invited for the reburial at Margraten. But I do remember my parents talking about the advancing army, trying to hold the bridges. There was Eindhoven, Son, Sint-Oedenrode, Vegel, Grave, Nijmegen, Groesbeek. It is a long time ago, but we do remember.
Gus van Der Hoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on life in rural Kansas. That's our time for today. Thanks for listening in. Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.